This is the podcast from Multi-Faith Matters. I'm your host, John Moorhead, and hopefully you are enjoying this podcast. This is not the only resource that we have through Multi-Faith Matters. We have additional podcasts. We have video versions of this, other videos. We have recommended books and articles and a network to plug into. You can find all of that at our website at multifaithmatters.org, where you can also find links to our social media. I would encourage you to, if you find this helpful, to subscribe to our podcast and to our YouTube page and things like that. And of course, we are a nonprofit organization, but that doesn't mean that we don't need funds to do what we do. So if you find this kind of work helpful in helping Christians not only fulfill the Great Commission and sharing their faith, but also loving their multi-faith neighbors, including those that they have strong differences with, then please consider clicking that donate button and supporting the work that we do. Today, we're doing something a little bit different, but I think very important. A lot of times we talk about religious difference or interreligious differences. Today, we're talking about something that's just as important in terms of ideological and racial differences. My guest today is Bradley J. Galloway, and I'll read his bio for you. Bradley J. Galloway was a fixture in the North American right-wing extremist movement for 13 years and was the president of a racist skinhead gang for 5 of those years. It is these lived experiences that play a role in his work in combating violent extremism. Brad currently works as the coordinator of the Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism at Ontario Tech University. Brad also works as a case manager with Life After Hate, where he assists others to find their way away from violent extremism. He also conducts research and intervention work at the Organization for the Prevention of Violence. He's been a research assistant on a number of projects that are funded by Public Safety Canada and the Canadian Network for Research on Terrorism, Security, and Society. Brad has also served as a consultant for Google, Moonshot CVE, and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, among others. His primary research interests include right-wing extremism and terrorism, preventing and countering violent extremism, and the roles of former extremists in combating violent extremism. Brad, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I am much more familiar with doing some research in terms of the academic work and looking at Islamic extremism, but so your conversation with me and I think the audience today will be extremely helpful. This all flows out of your experience. Can you share your personal story? How did you get involved in right-wing racial supremacy and extremism, and what kinds of things contributed to your moving in that direction?
Yeah, I think the biggest scenario that I refer to in this case is that, you know, we're all human beings. We're all growing up. We all are searching for an identity or a place in the world or belonging to something, and that's kind of what happened. I mean, basically, I met with a friend who had joined up with these groups back when I was living in Toronto, and yeah, he sold me a good story of like, hey, you can come in this group and you can have friends and you can have all these, all these, parties and all this stuff, an 18, 19-year-old kid. It sounded pretty good. But of course I didn't really understand what all the politics he was talking about. That would come slowly. So he slowly sort of introduced me to like what was, what was to be expected within these groups, but not right away. So he, introduced me to this idea that, immigrants were destroying our society, and I had to listen to this type of music, and here was some literature. It's sort of a slow process of getting me, involved in what I know now as the right-wing extremist movement. And basically it went from there to like, yeah, the belonging was there. These guys were there. They were real people, and it felt like sort of a family environment. Everyone had similar ideologies, so it was kind of like, I mean, I described this as I was just in a meeting yesterday with some colleagues, and I say, if it was a guy from the IRA or a guy from any kind of other gang or any kind of thing like that, I probably would have tried it out too, right? Because it was really about the trust relationship. I had known this person from before, and this promise of identity and then belonging and brotherhood within this group. And yeah, I mean, the ideology in itself came from it stems from whiteness in that sense. Like that's really the only thing that I had to meet the requirements of, and I met those requirements at the onset. And then it was really how much this guy, who I guess you call him a recruiter or whatever, how much he could sell me the rest of the stuff along the way, right? And yeah, it's about I guess accepting those beliefs and willing to like put other things aside and get involved with that kind of group. I mean, really, it's the basic. If it was something else, if there was other things that I could have joined instead of that, I think I would have. But hindsight's 2020, and I ended up in spending a lot of huge portion of my life hanging around this movement for about 13 years. So yeah.
As you look back on it, did you perceive yourself as having some needs or something that might have drawn you to this? Or my question is, what was your circumstance that connected you to it, rather than an average teen who might go to a party? And in other words, is everyone susceptible, or did you have something going on in your life? What are the dynamics going on there?
I mean, I'm the first person to say that I believe that anybody could become involved in these types of things with the right situations in play, like you're saying, sort of thing. So, I mean, I think at at some points, definitely, I was in a vulnerable scenario. Like, there's things that just added up in my life that um, whether it was recent sort of moving away from other positive friend groups towards like hanging out with these guys in the bars and yeah, there's some of that would have come into play. I think though, these groups and people that are already in the groups know that they can see vulnerabilities and that they can see that somebody's in a place in their life that if they sort of dangle that fruit in front of them of this opportunity, and they put it in such a way that it sounds like it will solve some of their problems. Where one of mine was like, I had no place to belong, I had no like real like friend group, I had like this or that guys to hang out with, but um not like what I was really searching for. And they had those answers. They said, okay, well, yeah, if you come here, here's the friends that you're looking for. Here's an identity. We'll look out for you. We're like your brothers. We're like your family. We're like, and a lot of the references within these movements is that they do say that. They're like, yeah, we're a brotherhood. We're a family. We're so it's almost like them trying to take the person away from what their family is and bring them into. I mean, this is similar to sort of cult ideas, but like it's I think that's very very present within these groups, is trying to see where those vulnerabilities are and play on them. So each person has their openings. Whether it's like so Toronto, where I grew up, is there it was a lot of Orthodox Jewish people were in that neighborhood. There was Filipino, so it was multiculturalism. So he really played on this guy really played on that, saying, hey, look, the Filipinos, the Orthodox Jews are taking over, we need to take this back. So he was really framing his arguments on reality. So I could like go see, there's a synagogue, there's the Filipino businesses, there's the Jewish business, like, and he really pointed those things out. And for a young kid who I didn't really know much, I was just working construction jobs or whatever, and I'm looking around going, maybe this has maybe he's right, like I'm giving it a chance, and I trusted the guy. So trust is a huge piece here. If they can draw people in with that trust piece, I think that's a huge dynamic here too, right? So
Yeah, so I think it's important for people to pick up on what you're saying here. I think we tend to look at people in certain groups as almost the incarnation of evil, right? And it's interesting how right and left on the spectrum play into that. If you're on the right, you're going to look at a Muslim extremist as the incarnation of evil, and not your blind spot's going to be the far right extremism. If you're, on the other side of the ideological spectrum, it's going to be reversed. So what you're saying is you weren't the incarnation of evil looking to hang out with other evil people. It was a social and relational process.
yeah, definitely, it's really about we're always seeking a peer group that we're proud of in our lives, right? And that's and for lost youth, young people, particularly, I think, and also nowadays we're seeing it in sort of older populations too that are joining up with these types of extremist ideas. It's like it's just that idea of like, look how many people believe, like we're here together, we're doing this together, like just like like a positive group would do. Like these guys frame it all along that, and then it's you know, I heard a guy recently say, then it's in the back room where they're telling you, hey, and here's our real plan, that we're going to go do violence and we're going to do all these other things, right? And I think that exists across the, like you're saying, the ideological spectrum, is that, they may draw you in with something that could be even like real, like there's real things going, like real grievances in the world. Whether it's like your people have been impoverished, or like you hear in the far right, they often talk about that kind of stuff. Like, everything's being taken away from you and given to them, right? So us and them. So, and that's in all across the whole ideological spectrum. You look at all types of extremism, they're going to say, hey, look, whether it's the IRA, they're saying, hey, look, the British took from us. Islamists, it's like the West is destroying this. Like this is just it's a natural way for their recruiters to reach into people, and that's probably, we're going to get to it later, but that's what, when we're looking at trying to help people get out, we have to reach in and see that these are human beings, that we're all human beings, we can help people. It's so
Yeah. One more question about the being in part. Well, what's the relationship between the draw of the ideology and those relationships? You didn't start out saying, man, it'd be really cool if I had some relationships with people who were far right racial extremists. So what's that relationship? Was the relationships there, and that was part of the story that you learned and adopted as a group? Help us understand the connection there.
Yeah, so I mean, initially it's like, you have this, I knew this person from earlier in my life who had gotten involved, and I don't really know his process, so I can't talk about that. But for me, the process was I knew him. So it's kind of like, I'm more likely to trust what he's saying than if it was just some guy that I met on the street corner with handing out a flyer, right? Like those that doesn't necessarily work as well, I think, in my opinion. I think it's the fact that I know I walk into a pub and I recognize the face, and I see that, I saw how the guy was dressed. I mean, this is part of it too, is that, he was dressed like a white power skinhead, right? When I saw him, but I noticed that, but like, I saw that, but I really just saw the person that I knew, though. So, and that's why I gave it a chance. I don't think if I didn't know that guy, I wouldn't have sat down next to a Nazi skinhead guy and started talking to him. Like,
Right.
that wouldn't have been a thing I did that day. But because I knew him, I had honest curiosity too, to find out what has my friend become involved in as well, right? So, and then he saw, I guess, a point that I was at in my life. Obviously, I think about this quite often. I mean, I was showing up to the pub alone, right? So I was looking to meet people, right? So this guy, he had that too. He had, hey, I'm here, you're here, you didn't come here with nobody, so you're going to listen to me, right? So he had that sort of advantage over the conversation. And yeah, I was certainly looking for that in-group to hang out with, and I think the guy sensed that, and that's fine. Yeah, I mean, that's the unfortunate reality of this stuff, is that we're all human, so we do want to, when we talk to people we know, I mean, even nowadays, when people ask about, hey, what do I do about my family member that's in QAnon or the far right or this or whatever? It's the same thing. This is a person we know, so we care to, like, I cared to find out why my friend here was involved in Nazism, but then he had enough on his, in his mind to come and try to draw me along too, right? So, and I was just, it happened to be that I was at a point where I was accepting some new beliefs into my life, right? So, yeah.
So you're a member for 13 years, and at some point, there was something that led to your dissatisfaction or facilitated the exit. What happened? What led to that change?
Well, it was no one thing. There was many things that sort of that were coming along, and firstly, the amount of time that I had spent in the movement. I think probably around 2008, I had got married that year. I started to question. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of things, and this was like sort of at the height of my involvement in the movement as well. It was becoming very exhausting having to like be this each day, hating people for what. Like I was starting to think of like, for what reason am I? And I always had my wife on my shoulder because she was never involved in it, and she was she would always say like, well, what is this? Like, question this. Like, why is this like? Why? How could you hate all of this? Like, what is or there'd be situations where the guys weren't following their rules of the constitution of the group or whatever, and she'd be like, how is it that a white supremacist is dating a not white person? Like, how is this person involved in so then the question started to rise, and I'm like, okay, now this is happening. All these things are happening so often. And I'm like, I don't know. But at this point I was a leader. So I'm going, I can't just tomorrow wake up and decide I'm now going to leave. I'm going to have to make some sort of plan about how to do that. I would stay involved for the next few years, but very skeptical over those next years of involvement and questioning more and more as it went on. And I think 2009, I had a child, and that sort of really certified the there's no way I'm going to be able to teach this stuff that I'm involved in to my child. So at the point where she was a baby, I'm thinking, okay, maybe I got a bit of time left to try to distance myself. So by 2011, my wife had firmly had enough, and she's like giving me an ultimatum, like, hey, it's going to be our family, because we were pregnant with another child coming along, and that was it. It was this or that. So I'm thankful for her in that sense, where she gave me that like firm, hey, this is going to be it now. No more sort of dabbling or figuring out how to leave. We'll figure it out. So over the next while, it was figuring out how to physically disengage from the group, which took a while, moving and doing things that, readjusting life and all of that kind of thing, which are challenging situations. But I think that, when I look back on it, I see these different things that happen along the way. And just like when I got into the movement, I had this relationship with this guy who sold me, this great story of the movement. I also now have this relationship with my wife and my kids that were teaching me empathy and teaching me to look at human beings rather than, putting everybody in their own silo, in their own box, and trying to, divide everybody. And, that's, for the next few years, that's what would happen. Like the people talk about, oh yeah, you disengage, then you deride, oh, you're done. It's not like that. It's, I think for people who spend more time in it, and a lot of them would tell you this, is that it's quite a process to get away from it. And it's, I think it's definitely possible. And that's why it's important to have dialogue like this to explore those factors and figure out where we can help other people in the same route, right? So
Yeah, I think there's a tendency for outsiders to kind of simplify or oversimplify. It's just, we'll just
mhm.
change your mind about it, and it's just a change of ideas, and then you just come out and things are great. But I don't think they realize your identity's tied to it. These relationships, you've got a worldview. So even though you had your wife and child as a support system, was it still somewhat of a struggle to make that exit?
Well, yeah, because if you think about it, you could even put this in the context of religion, right? So all of a sudden you just don't believe anymore, right? Like this was the thing, like you said, this was the identity, this was a lifestyle, this was everything. And then all of a sudden nope, it's all gone. I don't think that's possible. Like I just don't
Right.
really think, and it wasn't, and it was hard, and it was like, those day-to-day situations, and reteaching your mind not to say, okay, that's an Asian, why do I care? that's an Asian person. Who cares? It's a Canadian person, it's an American, who cares? But why even think about the people? So that's sort of the rethinking of the whole like training of the brain. Because it was, like I said, it was exhausting. I often say this is like the 24-hour a day hate. Like, how do you hate 24/7? You wake up and then you see an Indigenous person walking down the street and all of a sudden you hate this. Why? So it's that question, those questions that you have to work on to move yourself away from these types of groups. And it's like, and these ways of thinking, they're like, they get deeply sort of ingrained in your day-to-day life, right? And I mean, it's also the subcultural stuff that, I was part of a movement that was like a skinhead movement, right? So it was like, okay, so you wear boots and there's a way you dress, there was a way you sort of talked about things, there was a type of music you listened to, there was all of that had to go. So how does that really happen? Like, you don't just wake up one day and decide, okay, well, I'm not wearing any of those things, I'm not listening to that anymore, and I'm not thinking like this anymore. Like, it was just not, that was not possible. But so yeah, leaving the group in itself is really disengaging. So not being part of this group is yeah, I mean, I would say that's one of the most important steps in this process. And that's something that obviously it has to happen, but it's that's just the start of the journey, for many, right? So
Yeah, sounds
yeah.
like a challenge. If I understand the statistics correctly, there's been a growth in the last several years in far-right extremism. What kinds of things are going on, not just politically, but in the broader culture that's contributing to all of this?
Well, I mean, people always want to equate this to something, main thing that's happening. I think it's many things. I think it's like, yeah, political climate is one of them. When we're divided, I think actually, President-elect Biden, he's one thing that resonated with me when I was watching, and I'm Canadian, so forgive me here, but this did resonate with me when he said, he was just talking about the pandemic. So it's a similar sort of item, right? Is like, if we don't look at this collectively, and we're looking at it divided, we're going to fail at this, right? I mean, those are the same way we need to look at violent extremism, whether it's Islamic inspired extremism, right-wing extremism. Like, we need to look at it as a broad society, as the society. But when the society is right now, the way that things are going, we have like these, all sorts of different types of far right groups that are existing. And also, I believe it's the media plays a huge role here too, of like, perhaps maybe putting those groups up on this huge platform and giving them, like, shedding light on it, making it a lot bigger than it could be. I mean, if we look at the actual membership in these groups, I don't like saying their names because I just don't like giving them a shout out, but we could talk about alt-right groups, we can talk about neo-Nazi groups, we can talk about accelerationist groups, but we look at actual membership in these groups. Like, are we really talking about something that's, I mean, I'm not trying to take down the risk of it, but I'm trying to say that I think it is something that we can deal with, and it's something that we are prepared to deal with. And but society has to look at this in a much more streamlined fashion, that we're doing this together and we're not doing it separately. And it's not something that's associated with our mainstream, right? And I know there's a lot of research that says, okay, well, yeah, the extremists are trying to make it go mainstream. Well, yes, they'd love to do that, but let's not let them do that as Americans and as Canadians. Let's be, we can work on those things together. And whether that's, we're working on it in faith-based communities, we can work together. Definitely in civil society, like grassroots stuff, like much of the work that I do is connecting with other, grassroots organizations to do the same type of work, so we can do it collectively rather than separating ourselves in silos. And that's what they'd like, though. That's what the extremists want, no matter which side they're coming from on the extremism. They want, if everyone's separated and divided, then we're all warring each other. And that's what they want. They want disaster. They want societal decay. They want all those things. So we need to be that together notion that, I know it sounds great, but that's exactly what we do need. And it's like, we need to stop seeing each other as enemies of this, because really violent extremism should be the enemy of American society, Canadian society, any society, right? Should be rejecting this stuff, right? So it should be, I know it's tough to put into that context, but often people try to blame it on stuff, though they'll blame it on, that political climate that's going on with the last 4 years, or the time before that. I mean, in 2008, this is a personal sort of instinct story on how much that can matter to these groups if you give them that fuel, right? So 2008, Obama gets elected. Okay, obviously a black president is going to be something that is annoying to the far right, and is going to present an option for them to recruit people, right? Just as if we give them this platform with the Trump administration, if we send them and say, yes, this is great for you guys, they are going to use this as they will use any platform to recruit. They don't care if it's the Trump administration, Obama administration. They'll use anything to get people involved in their movement. That's what they want. They want numbers, and they want, to destroy America. That's the point. So at the end of the day, what do? Like, we need to respond to that as a greater community, not just sit here and go, oh yeah, well, it must be because of this. Nah, let's try not to do that, because they will. I mean, I've seen them use economics. I've seen them use climate. I've seen them use all sorts of platforms to push their messaging. So it's a multi-pronged effort. So that's the thing, is that we need to come at that, and we're much bigger than the extremist groups, right? The broader society. So yeah.
What's the role of the internet? I've seen some articles that almost blame the whole phenomenon on, the internet's there and that's it. I've seen other that, to me, as a non-specialist in this area, seem to be arguing that it's a tool. We've had extremism for a long time, and they draw upon whatever tools are at their disposal to help with their movement. And the internet's a good tool. What's the role of the internet in the growth of these kinds of groups?
Well, I mean, I often put at least far right extremism in my life. I look at it pre 9/11 and post, and then you got the pre-internet, like the pre 9/11 internet of like these like websites and sort of like Yahoo and the Napster, and then after 2001, these guys started getting a little smarter with their internet, if you will, and started building their presence, started to monetize the internet to push their violent extremist groups, selling stuff online, doing that. I mean, that was present before, but it became really, 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 really popular. And then, of course, I talk about the Stormfront sites like that being like, communication zones for like all white nationalists to go to, all white supremacists to go to. And then you have then the group like forums, sort of they're trying to get you from the main communication forum to the other group forums. And then of course our social media friends came along with Facebook and Twitter, and this just sort of added more opportunities, like I was saying before about the platforms, so they can use like real world political climate platforms to jump onto, but now they're using actual sort of virtual platforms to try to jump onto as well. So and then of course more recently they have the 4chans, and all the different apps, Telegram, all this stuff. I mean, they will literally use everything to try to accelerate their whatever whichever group they're part of. I mean, that's the point though, and I think in the early 2000s, it is. I mean, I will say that I think the internet had a lot to do with transnationalizing the far right movement. I mean, I was in a group specifically that, because of the internet, we were able to make chapters in 11 countries around the world, right? And I don't think that would have happened otherwise, because we were often without resources. We wouldn't have been flying around to all different countries, doing that. I think the internet really connected there and gave us that. And also now, like I said, goes from communication forums to the group forums, then into the social media. So then everybody has their own social medias, and they're all, more a chance to recruit and suck people into the movement. I mean, yeah, the 2000s was a tough time for that. It was a huge thing for recruitment. I'm often part of the camp that knows that I know social media companies are working hard on it now, and I know they're doing lots to try to circumvent these groups from using their platforms. But man, it is a real game of whack-a-mole with trying to get rid of the groups, and imagine all the individuals that are just trying to use it for their own, recruitment purposes, or their own trying to sell ideology to even just their little friend group on Facebook. Like it's a massive mogul, and for me, I don't see how we're going to really put a dent in that. I think we've slowed it down, but I don't think it's there, so they're going to use it. I mean, whether it's ISIS or white supremacist groups, if there's an opportunity, they're going to do it. They're just, and especially if it's free. I mean, that's one of the biggest things about terrorist groups is they often operate with low budget, right? So, and they figure out ways to do it. So we've got to figure out ways to slow their usage of our at least our mainstream platforms. We've got to try to keep them. I'm one of those people. We got to keep them away from it. I understand that could push them to other places, but I don't know. I still think I'd rather not have them on our mainstream platforms recruiting new people. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. I know there's a lot of similarity, but I'm sure there's also a lot of differences and diversity amongst these different groups and movements and so on. I don't want to oversimplify, the process here, but you mentioned that the goal is polarization, division, anarchy. For a lot of these folks, is that the end game, the desired result, or is that something that they hope to achieve as they look beyond that to something else? What are they looking for?
Well, I mean, dependent on the group, in accelerationism, they're looking for the end of days, the day of the rope, these things they talk about, which is not much different from when we look back into the 1980s. We see the order. That's what they were trying to do. Loosely, of course, based on literature that exists within the far right, like Turner Diaries and Hunter and these types of things. Violence, I think, is the key word here. They're looking for violence. They're looking for civil unrest. They're looking for societal breakdown, so that if you create the violence, that extreme answers need to come from government. Some groups aren't looking to overtake the government; like they're actually sort of even loosely aligned with it. Like some of these extreme right groups are like, yeah, we're pro police, we're Republicans, like, or whatever they're saying they are, but they still want violence in society to create enough dissent to get their extreme version of whatever they believe in, right, into the mainstream, right? So, and then of course the real extreme guys want to see the complete toppling of everything in America, and want to see a new government come, and particularly national socialism return, that kind of thing. Often delusions of grandeur. They're seeing themselves almost as an army, or like Adam often refers to themselves as some revolutionary soldiers or whatever. And I just picture, sorry for being so real here, but like the American army and then Adam Waffen. And I'm kind of like, I'm dumbfounded with like where they think they would actually, Adam Waffen would get with against the US Army. I just don't. It often, like the way that people equate the extremeness of it and then the war that they're talking about, I'm like, remember, the war would be against like the allied forces of the world. So I just don't think 28 guys that are loosely trained are going to do yes, they can do things that are awful and have done horrific things, the far right, but I really don't think in the grand scheme of things, the so-called Turner Diaries race war, day of the rope thing is is a possibility. And I'm just trying to be society forward, thinking like, we have the answers to deal with these things. So we should often talk about how we are prepared to deal with it. And I think there are leaders definitely in our communities that do talk about that, and they say, yeah, we're ready for this. We can deal with these violent extremists, and we will deal with them, right? And we see right now, there's one case that's going on in where there was a Canadian guy who jumped the border, and there's some things going on. They're all before the courts. Like, these people have been caught, and we should also focus on that we are doing what we can right now. We're trying to look at these things, and I think Department of Homeland Security is doing a lot right now to look at far right extremism in the United States. I think, of course, there can always be more, but there's a lot of steps have been made over the last decade to look at this, and we have to understand, how fast does policy really go through government as well? Like, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. Like, people often want that answer, right now, and it's like, well, that's not how these things work. They have to pass through a lot of things before they become a reality. So yeah, I'm from the camp of the people that think that we can do this, like we can deal with this. And I think I'm not a defeatist in that sense. So yeah.
Well, for the last part of our conversation, let's talk about that part, how we can do this. I remember after the alt-right rally, when a gentleman got into his car and plowed into the folks that were there, killing a young woman. And some of the discussion of that on social media, on Facebook, I saw a lot of my friends on the left get behind this idea of punch a Nazi. And I stepped in because of my work in peacemaking and interreligious dialogue. And I said, I don't think that's an effective approach. I mean, it may appeal to an individual that they're getting even with, they're taking a stand. I saw one guy posted a picture of, I think it was Captain America punching a Nazi from comics, in the 1930s and 40s. But then I listened to people like the late neuroscientist and peacemaker Emile Bruneau. And he was talking about empathy. And he said that he watched a young man who was affiliated with these rallies. And you could tell he was starting to have a change of heart. And it wasn't the shaming of the crowd that did it. It was, he said, in his experience, it's always somebody who's extending undeserved empathy and care to an individual. Would you resonate with that? What types of things do we need to be doing? How do we resist the urge to respond to far-right violence with violence and engage in more strategic and effective kinds of approaches?
Yeah, I mean, that I definitely I could tell countless stories about how empathy won the battle more so than more violence. I mean, it's there's I have colleagues that are also formers, and everybody's stories have a little bit in it of this empathy piece, and in the sense of understanding from my perspective, when I was in the movement, my life was saved by a Jewish doctor early on, and I used that scenario to promote violence or whatever at the time that I went out and I was fighting, and I covered up the fact that there was this guy who came in and didn't say hey, you're he was a Hasidic, like Orthodox Jewish guy, and he didn't mention, hey, you're a neo-Nazi, I can't I can't serve you or save you or do anything like that. He just went about his business and sent me on my way, right? But I remember that as a piece of when I was doing my ideological healing away from the movement, as like, well, it's that type of thing. When we look at, when somebody reached out their hand and didn't judge you and didn't treat you like an enemy or a foe or this type of thing, or someone who's awful, horrible people, like any of these things you can come up with. And I remember that same thing again with Charlottesville. There was an incident, I think, where there was a young white fella who was getting attacked by some protesters, and he happened to be a neo-Nazi guy. But then a black fella came along and helped him out of the crowd, and instead of adding fuel to that fire. That it was a very volatile crowd, could have gone a really different way, but because this gentleman decided to say, you know what, I don't want to see this guy get beat up. I don't care who I don't care if he's an, I don't care what kind of human being this person is. I'm going to go and take him out of there and make sure he didn't, no more violence. Right. And that to me is amazing. And then of course I remember there's a video of a prominent white supremacist guy getting punched. And I was thinking, you know, what does this accomplish? You know, we're going to, if we're going to promote violence, we're almost just as bad as what these people are saying themselves. So how about we don't punch Nazis? How about we talk to them about what's going on? What is, because I know in my life, I was just at a point where I was just sort of lost in life, and I was just looking for somewhere to belong to and looking for an identity in life. Perhaps some of these people are going through the same issues and they just don't understand the world. So let's have a conversation about it, right? And differing views are not a reason to like beat each other up. Like we should be able to have a conversation about things without punching each other, right? So you know, I think of nonviolent tactics. Like I think of, you know, in studying martial arts, how important things like meditation and things like clarity and things like that are in life, spirituality, a lot of different things. Those things come in and ground us. And it really doesn't ground us when our knee-jerk reaction is to use violence to solve violence. Why? What did we get out of it? What do we get out of it? What's come out of that Charlottesville incident? A woman has lost her life. It's tragic, right? And this is, you know, that's all that does is create more violence from, you know, why do this? Why can't we have a conversation about it? Why can't we try to figure out those things before these tragedies happen? Like we have to understand these are human beings who are doing these things too, these types of attacks. So where have we let humans get to that they're in that place where they feel they need to do that, right? So I think some of the this is on us as a society, that we're left in a place where we're so divided, right? So we have to come back together to work on this together, because it's man, it's hard watching those types of things, you know, because we see them fairly often nowadays, where there's these different types of attacks, whether it's the Sikh temple shooting in Wisconsin, whether it's Charlottesville, you know, over the last decade, it's been a lot to deal with, right, for society. And that's what, you know, how do we come around from that? And I think, you know, when you mention empathy, I think empathy is one of the most important parts here of ourselves as community members, and moving on and trying to get to a place where we're not warring all the time, and we're not wanting to just punch each other over everything, right? Because we're not going to solve anything. We're just going to, it's going to perpetuate more awful things happening, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I recently jumped into a Facebook comments section. Somebody posted an essay someone had written about that from the perspective of the left, of now that they've won the election, you know, the other side on the right, they've got to apologize, and that we're not going to have unity unless they take certain steps and acknowledge everything they've done. And from my perspective, I said, look, you know, I don't think you can hold out those things unless you do A, B, and C. I'm not going to seek unity. Don't we have to come together? And then in that context of togetherness and exploration, doesn't mean we're glossing over our deep differences. It just means that we're coming together to try and work through it. And through that process, then forgiveness becomes possible. Am I missing something here?
No, I mean, that forgiveness is a tough thing though, right? And it's a process, and it's not something that just like, you know, happens. It's just like, you know, and that's that too. Like when I'm dealing with in a lot of my work, I'm helping a lot of people, and I know that forgiveness, from like my perspective, from my wife, and from those communities that my groups affected, that didn't just, and may never happen. And I accept that. I accept if they don't want it, that's fine. You know, they don't have to forgive for my involvement in that. And that's the way we try to explore those things, is like, don't expect certain things to happen from things. because forgiveness sure can happen, and it's about having those tough, real tough conversations. I mean, I remember myself and a colleague being in a synagogue, and we're talking about our time in the movement, and yeah, talking to the people afterwards, I just don't, you know, it was really, really nice for them when they were coming up and saying, you know, we forgive you, you know, your actions are not, don't define your future, you know, and things like that. And I'm like, you know, I don't deserve this. That's how I felt. I said, I don't think I deserve this, but I thank them, you know, because that's important, for them to feel like they had a moment to say, you know, I see what you guys did and who you were, but we forgive you as a community. You know, that's a really meaningful point, and they sure don't need to do that, right? But we had some tough conversations, which led to that, right? I mean, I one of the biggest conversations that means so much to me in my sort of journey here has been, I was filming a documentary three years ago, I think, and there was a guy working on it, and he told me the story about his mother always had a bag packed under the bed, and they were Jewish, because she feared when the Nazis were going to come back and that she would have to run again. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure he was one of the people who wanted to share that story of, like, you know, this is the reality of how people are living, and you were living like a neo-Nazi, and here is my mother, an elderly person who is scared for her life still since the 1940s. Is that fair? Not at all, right? It's not fair for her to be reliving that trauma over and over again. But what is fair is that I know that as a person who lived this life, I should know that people were going through that when they saw us walking down the street. That reminded them of that, right? And that's what he was, I think, sharing that to let me know that. And that was really really resonated with me, that he, you know, had the courage to share that story, first of all. Yeah, it just, those types of things, I think. But maybe he was now able to move on with a little bit of his trauma that he has had in his life, which these are important things for us. Instead of punching each other, I'm sure he wanted to at points, you know, when we were working, and I don't blame him for those. But instead of doing that, we interact, and these tough conversations, they work out, and I think we were able to converse more and open up doors that we would never have been able to open up if we were like, oh, we just solved it with punching each other. Okay, it's not solved, because we're going to want to punch each other every time we see each other, right? So it's and I think that's the whole Antifa far right thing right now. It's like, oh, I'm going to punch you, you're going to punch, you know. Well, why? You know, I get it. I get, society doesn't need neo-Nazis. No, it doesn't. But who are those people? They're human beings in there. And granted, I understand there will be some that are some extremists that are too far down the road. I mean, we understand that, but there are people that we can bring back into, I think. So
In terms of how people can help, one thing that I read in an interview that you gave that really struck me is you encourage people not to go after refuting the ideology, but to rehumanize people. I think we're so focused on ideas and winning arguments in our culture that we've lost sight, again, coming back again to that relational component. Why is it important for people, if they want to help, to not go with that first instinct? If I just refute this racist ideology, then I'll win the person. Why is that strategy usually doomed to failure?
These are people with beliefs of their own. These are like the human beings who thought, you know, maybe they read somewhere, maybe they grew up with it, maybe they are in a hate group, maybe they're whatever. There's a lot of things going on. So instead of challenging that ideology, I ask the person about them. Who are you? What do you do for a living? What do you want to do? What are your aspirations? What are your dreams? we're all human. We have these as human beings. We all have those. So let's talk about those. Let's set some goals. Let's talk about that. You know, that ideologies will change as we get along, you know, and I try to encourage people to, if they've given up on spirituality, they've given up on a, you know, going to church or going to a synagogue or whatever it is that they went before us, you know, that was a positive, they talk about in sociology, like a positive attachment to community, right? So go back, do that, build relationships back with your parents or people that you lost touch with because you became involved in these groups. You know, spend more time with your kids if they have kids, or you know, spend more time outside doing physical activity, trying to you know, get them involved in pro-social activity, because it's the anti-social activity that's within these groups, the hate, the fear, the paranoia, all this stuff that's going on, that you want to get them away from those activities. And yeah, the ideology, I mean, like I was saying, it's 24-hour-a-day hate when you're in the groups. But like, if you're spending your time walking the dog, going to hang out with your dad, going to church, going to whatever, you're not going to have, by the time you're done all these things and you're happy and you feel better about yourself as an individual, we hope that you're not spending your time sitting in front of the internet trying to look at hate videos or trying to, you know, get involved in these echo chambers, right? Because we're all, I think, this sounds whatever, it's a wishy-washy, but like I often tell people, like, you know, what are we all in the pursuit for? We are in the pursuit for happiness, right? We are all looking for happiness in our lives. Like, we don't want another negative thing around the corner, right? And that's what, unfortunately, within these groups, I'm not even talking about the ideology, it's the group in itself and the belonging to that group. So when you walk down the street, you're a neo-Nazi, you're all dressed up like that, you're going around, the likelihood of someone else assaulting you and you losing your life, like, why are you putting yourself on the line for what? What's going on? Why don't you want this, the positive life where you have, you know, positive relationships, positive goals, you know, go back to school, get a degree, go do some studying, go whatever. Like, there's lots of things in the world. So trying to open up the doors of opportunity to human beings to see that there is a different opportunity than what they're doing. And not saying it's bad what you're doing, just saying if you adjust what you do, you might enjoy life a little better. You know, and it's not about judging people for what they've thought or what thoughts they've had in their mind, right? Like, I mean, we have all had times in our lives where we probably don't like ourselves for some things that we've thought, right? You know, and I think human beings are redeemable. I think that's the point, right? Like, it's kind of like the idea of the guy who goes to prison for 30 years or whatever, you know, they kill somebody and they get out after 30 years. Do we help that person? I think we should. I think we should help that person. They're lost. They're a human being. They've done their time. They were sentenced to X number of years and they did all their time and they're out. So they're not a throwaway. They're also a human being. We should also help this person. So it's similar to that. I have to talk about that. We cannot judge them by those actions that 30 years ago. That does not define them. They could be something else. They can be different, but they should, you know, they should understand their actions and take accountability. So we talk about accountability a lot, right? To be accountable for the time that you spent in the movement, but also know that you can move on, right?
How can folks find the organizations you're involved with on the internet, and how can they support the good work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, Life After Hate is online. There's a website there, and yeah, Organization for Prevention of Violence. Yeah, that's our Evolve program. Yeah, this is the program for folks that are looking to leave violent movements in general. And yes, Life After Hate's Exit USA program. Yeah, so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I will include links to that in the program notes on YouTube and with the Anchor podcast. And Brad Galloway has been my guest. Brad, thank you so much for responding to my inquiry and taking the time to share with the listeners and the viewers. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Yeah, thanks for having me in.
Yeah. Again, this is the podcast for Multi-Faith Matters. I hope you found this conversation helpful. You can find it not only audio form, but video form on YouTube. And you can find this and other resources on the website at multifaithmatters.org. Again, I'm your host, John Moorhead. Thanks for listening and viewing.